Hi and welcome to pmplounge.com. Today we are covering a report by PMI, The Essential Role of Communications. This report is available for free on the PMI website and I will link to it in the description below. So do go over, you can download it for free. No membership required, nothing is required. It's a free report, all copyrights acknowledged, no copyrights infringement intended. This is a free report by PMI, which you can download from the link available in the description. So it is talking about the essential role of communications. This is a part of PMI's Pulse of the Profession in-depth report. The high cost of low performance, which means if you have people uh, performing low in your organization, you have a high cost to pay. All right, and before we get into this report, we are not going to obviously kind of go over the entire report, but we will only be going over the basically some of the important graphs that I could find from this report, and I thought it would be helpful to share it with them. So we will go over it. Once in one of our previous videos, we have already discussed this, and I'd like to mention it here again so that it's kind of clear when we talk about high performers and low performers, what do we really mean by it? So if you have more projects that finish on time within the original budget and with meeting the original goals and business intent of the project, these are the hallmarks of high performing organizations as they average 80% or more of projects for these three measures. So, high performing organizations, whenever I mention high performing organizations or simply high performers in this video, I'm talking about organizations who have about 80% of their projects finishing on time within the original budget and meeting the original goals and business intent of the project. So, those are high performers. When I say low performers in this video or low performing organization, I'm talking about organizations whose average of meeting these three measures are 60% or less. Three measures I would repeat again: finishing the project on time, within the original budget, and meeting the original goals and business intent of the project. So that's a definition of the high performers and low performers for you. Just so if I refer to them in the video, you are not confused by it. So let's get started. Let's try to kind of go over our first graph and discuss this report in detail. All right, so the first graph in question talks about organizations that communicate effectively have more successful projects. Now, if you have forgotten already, the report that we are discussing is about communications. It's called the essential role of communications. And in our previous videos as well, we have seen how communication is actually the most important quality, the most important aspect of project management. It is a bit I would say it is a bit of a downside that most of the PMP aspirants feel communication is the easiest topic in the exam, and it actually is. But when it comes to real life project management, real life communication of the project manager with the stakeholders, that is actually the key in delivering successful projects. So here in our first graph that says organizations that communicate more effectively have more successful projects. So highly effective communicators have met original goals 80% of the time, while minimally effective communicators have met original goals only 52% time. Similarly, on time 71% for highly effective communicators, only 37 for minimally effective communicators. 76% highly effective communicators were within budget, while only 48% were within budget of those who are minimally effective communicators. So, communication, we just talked about the high performers and low performers in the previous slide, right? The high performing organizations and the low performing organizations. To use the measures that we kind of made use of was these three: meeting original goals, being on time, and being within budget. And you can see how the highly effective communicators are doing really good in this, in all these three measures. So that was about the first graph. And with this, it is kind of clear that not only is an organization risking dollars, but it is risking project success rates as well when it comes to communication. The research proves that ineffective communication leads to fewer successful projects. Organizations that are minimally effective communicators report significantly fewer projects that meet original goals, come in on time, and complete within budget. So, the three measures that we talked about. So, that's that with this figure. Let's move on to the next one. Now, it's clear that not all projects are going to succeed, right? But on an average, 2 in 5 projects do not meet their original goals and business intent. And one half of those unsuccessful projects are related to ineffective communications. And that is what we are seeing here, right? 1 out of 5 projects is unsuccessful due to ineffective communications. These are 5 projects. 3 are successful, 2 are not successful, 1 is unsuccessful because of ineffective communication. So you see how important communication really is, right? Okay, moving on to our next figure. All right. So when companies close the gap between, the developers of the strategy and those that must execute it. So we are talking about developers of strategy, the higher management, the executive management, the C-suite, right? And those that must execute it, the people who are lower in the hierarchy, the engineers, the team leads, the middle managers even. So projects are more successful if you have the gap between developers of the strategy and those that must execute it is as close as possible. So those projects are more successful. Organizations that report more frequent project communications, particularly surrounding the business benefit and contribution to strategy, average significantly more successful projects versus organizations that communicate that same information less frequently. So we're talking about frequent communication in this graph for sure. So you see frequent communication that is clear and relevant, and frequent communication about business benefit and contribution to strategy leads to more successful projects. So you see business benefit strategy, 81% it was communicated successfully, communicated frequently, and projects were successful. When it was communicated infrequently, only 65% of the projects were successful. With sufficient clarity and detail, when it was communicated with sufficient clarity and detail and communicated frequently, 84% projects succeeded, while infrequently, only 54%. When non-technical language was used, now this is so important. Most of the times, information going around is very technical and people don't really understand it. And when non-technical language is used, 82% of the projects are successful. When non-technical language is used and communicated frequently, well, when non-technical language is used and communicated infrequently, only 60% of the projects succeed. So It's important to note that although you may use non-technical language, even then, if your communication is infrequent, only 60% of such projects succeed. So there is a 40% chance that even though you're using non-technical language and you're communicating infrequently, project will actually fail. All right, moving on. So this is simple again figure that talks about the communication effectiveness and high performance. Those who communicate more effectively are more likely to be high performers. We've already discussed what high performers and low performers are. So highly effective communicators, 38% highly effective communicators are more than 5 times more likely to be high performers than minimally effective communicators. So communication is the key, communication is the king when it comes to project management, and that is again being proved by this graph as well. So let's move on. All right, so we have two figures here. We've got high performers and low performers again. I've already discussed what high performers and low performers are. Figure 9, it talks about high performers communicate more frequently across all topics, including communicating the strategy and business benefit. High performers, in figure 10, high performers communicate more frequently than low performers in all ways of delivering the messages. So you see objectives, high performers communicate it 73% of the time, low performers only 36% of the time. Budget 75% to 38%. Schedule 81% to 49%. Scope 76% to 36%. Outcomes 83% to 39%. In fact, outcomes is the highest of all the things that are communicated more frequently, right? So outcomes is one, and then the second is the schedule. So those two are probably the top two things to communicate to your team if you want to be a high performer, because that's what high performers do. Benefits and strategy 64% for high performers, 25% for low performers. Timely manner 79% versus 42%. What timely manner are we talking about here? So again, you can read high performers communicate more frequently than low performers in all ways of delivering the message. So in all ways of delivering the message, they are delivering it in timely manner. Sufficient clarity and details 75% for high performers, 34% for low performers. Non-technical language 72% versus 39%. Appropriate settings or media 77% to 40%. In this figure, do you see how the top two points are communicating your message in a timely manner and using the appropriate settings or media? So those two are the top. Third one, of course, having sufficient clarity, and fourth one is use of non-technical language. All right, so let's move on. Let's move on to the next graph. Well, there's no graph. There actually is one graph in the end, which I will go over because that graph is actually the first one that you would see in the report, but I put it in the last so that everything falls into perspective and you can kind of walk away with that graph. And of course, these points of conclusion. Number one, close the communication gap around business benefits. That is important. Tailor communications to different stakeholder groups. So you need to talk to stakeholder groups in their own language. Acknowledge the value of project management, including project management communications. Like I mentioned in the beginning, right? Communications could be an easier topic for your PMP exam, but when it comes to real life projects, communication is the key. Use standardized project communications practices and use them effectively, of course. So these four are the conclusion that you can walk away. And like I mentioned earlier, I have one more graph, which is actually the first graph in the report. But I thought I'll kind of mention it later on so that all of this falls into perspective. So ineffective communication puts 75 million US dollars at risk. And this is some formula that they've used. The amount at risk due to ineffective communications for every 1 billion US dollars spent on a project is percent of projects not meeting goals, percent of unsuccessful projects where ineffective communication is contributing factor, percent of projects that fail due to ineffective communication, percent of failed projects, that is the budget lost, percent of every dollar at risk due to ineffective communication. So they have probably used something like this, a formula, and they've come up with a number which is 75 million US dollar, which is a huge number to be frank. All right, and that is all that we had in this video. Hope you enjoyed our coverage of the entire report. To download, it's free for all. You can download your copy of the report and read it thoroughly. It's a really nice report. It basically shows you how important communications really are, and how do you draw lines of understanding when you kind of go through a video like this and kind of understand the importance of communications. You need to understand, if you are a project manager, if you are into a project management industry, if you're looking for a project management role, let's say, the first thing that you need to pay attention to is your communication skills, right? Because that is absolutely so much important, because that is something which is causing 75 million US dollars of loss for companies only because of ineffective communication. So in the job interview that you attend for project management related position, if you can prove how you are an effective communicator, you have the job, right? Half of your job of cracking that interview is already done. Right. So that's one of the lines you can draw by, going over videos like this that are going to help you in your project management profession as well. Do follow us on our social media, facebook.com/PMP Lounge and twitter.com/PMP Lounge. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to us if you have not done so already. And check out the website pmplounge.com for the latest and the best free articles on project management and project management industry available out there. Thank you.